Christian, thanks very much indeed for socking it to us there with all those different thoughts about Hong Kong and Southeast Asia and indeed the world in general. And really, we've had interesting talks from our three talented young and semi-young people who are talking about their companies here in Hong Kong, from really the esoteric to the really very basic. But I wonder if I could start now with our question and answer session and talking to Peter Young. Peter, earlier you were really talking about Hong Kong and Shanghai, and I'd like to sort of take you a little bit further and look at the way in which Hong Kong and Shanghai combine. How do they combine? Just go.
We had the experience of operating both in Hong Kong and in Shanghai, and there are certain complementary criteria that Shanghai has. I wanted to mention that when you do business in China, if you are in a position where you need to travel to many of the places within China, Shanghai has some advantage being geographically at the mouth of the Yangtze River, and that it has very easy access to many of the cities in China, and that you are able to travel to these destinations. Now, having physically stationed in Shanghai for 4 years and live in Shanghai, and then previous to that I lived about 4 years in Suzhou, I have to say that it is, in spite of what you've learned from the media, in spite of what has been put off in magazines, etc., it is a very difficult place to live. And I wanted to stress, not strongly enough, to all of us that the quote-unquote internationals would find it a lot easier to be living in Hong Kong than in Shanghai. Shanghai is a very, very difficult place to live. And I think from that aspect, you have an issue with if you have a business in Shanghai and in Hong Kong, you have to have the business in Shanghai that somebody will be running and operating that business. And you're going to have a hard time finding people that will be able to operate efficiently in Shanghai. When I was stationed in Shanghai, I was, every day I had to work very, very late, and I was shocked at the difficulty in getting local Shanghai staff to take responsibilities and create a hierarchy. So at the end of the day, all of the questions that end up on my desk or end some of me. So I would say that Shanghai has some advantages and some disadvantages, and I would say that it is in some areas complementary to what Hong Kong has to offer, but it has a long way to go to come anywhere close to Hong Kong. So maybe the way that you can address it easily is that you can say that Hong Kong is a headquarter and Shanghai is maybe a sub-branch.
Yes, and indeed, statistics seem to bear that out. Peter, thanks. And staying with the subject, really, of staff, I have a question from, I think, a chapter member in Finland, talking about, I think, staff on the mainland, and asks Zane, what is your opinion of some of the key issues to motivate key personnel to stay when you're on the mainland?
So the question is related to retention of staff in China.
Retention of staff seems to be the main focus. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's my industry, but maybe it's obvious too. But money has a lot to do with it these days. We're not sure right now that you can expect the same type of loyalty as you might have expected in the past in different countries. So one of the challenges that we have these days, for example, is that with all this foreign direct investment going into China these days, there's a heck of a lot of money going into China. It's weird, right, if you think about it, because when you look at the capital structure of China, you can put money in, but it's pretty difficult to pull money out. But yet, because people see China as being so strategically important to their business, they're investing a lot of money into China. So to get back to the original question, because there's so much money going into China, there's a heck of a lot of money that's out there to try to hire new staff, especially staff that are competent, that can create hierarchy, that can build systems and can, untangle the web that you have in China. So for us today, if we look at things like the packages and compensation we offer to folks in China, there are no stock options. Benefits are pretty minimal, to be honest. There's no extra vacation days that we throw in. What it's about is how much you can earn from a base salary standpoint and total compensation packages, total target compensation. So I wish I could say there was something different, saying people are looking to work for companies that have a great reputation overseas. But I think because there's so many foreign companies already in China, if you're good, if you have skills, there'll be tons of people that are looking to hire you. So at the end of the day, it becomes, unfortunately, kind of related to compensation. Again, that's not a very happy answer that I provided there, but
Zane,
I think it might be the reality.
do you also have, just to follow that up, do you also find that you use Hong Kong as a base to train people to, in particular in your business, because it's somewhat technical?
It's extremely important. And one thing that I actually had meant to talk about in my presentation, but I didn't have a chance to, the macroeconomic changes that we're seeing in the world today in terms of the threat of recession, decrease in liquidity, slowing down of capital flows, these will eventually lead to some sort of recession. This is the candid reality. How big this recession is, how small this recession is, we don't know. What we know is within our industry, within a lot of industries, we're seeing order books for the next year and a half start to slow down because people are being more cautious. One question for you, if you have China staff today, how many of your staff have been through a recession before in China? Will they know how to react to that? Now,
but in the same way, have any of us been through a recession, possibly, of any real significance?
Well, I would add, though, at the same time, though, at least in Hong Kong, you have a group of people, a group of managers that have something which is akin to something like a deep recession. So you've been through things like the Asian financial crisis. You've been through things like SARS. You've been through things, to a certain extent, like the tech bubble as well, too. So in our world, in the BlackBerry world, I don't know if anyone's actually been sold BlackBerry before, but we don't sell BlackBerry based on the handset. Even though the handset is a lot better looking than the original BlackBerries, if anyone's familiar with the original BlackBerries, they were butt ugly. And no one bought BlackBerry because of the way it looked. But we sell BlackBerry based on value proposition and something called solution selling. And this type of selling is a very different sort of skill set. This is focused on return on investment, total cost of ownership, productivity gain, cost savings. We're not selling on the fact that a handset has a HVGA screen, operates at 3.6 megabits per second HSDPA, has 1 gig memory built in. These are technical specs. As the economy changes and as things change in China, your sales and marketing organizations, your staff have to be able to adapt for that too. So, case in point, I've organized some sales training for all of our Hong Kong and China staff next week. And it's specifically focused on refocusing on how do you sell based on value. Business is too easy in China these days. There's too much money there, even for us. Our China business today is focused around selling to MNCs and state-owned enterprise. The state-owned enterprise are those that have been floated. There's heaps and heaps of money there. And it's easy business today, but it's not going to be easy business 6 months from now. And how your company reacts to that macroeconomic change in China, I think is going to impact how successful you are in the medium and long term. So,
Zane,
yeah.
Thanks very much indeed. Just to remind anyone in the audience, if they want to put questions to Zane or Peter or Christian, by all means do so by writing something down on a note and passing it to one of my colleagues, or alternatively grabbing a microphone yourself. I'd like to turn to Christian and really ask you about how it is that you came to Hong Kong from Scandinavia. You were sort of brought up there. It was your home, and here you are, sort of jumping into the unknown, I guess, and coming to Hong Kong. How did all that happen?
Well, it actually just happened. I guess it's my nature. I just.
Yeah.
Well.
That's right. Just keep talking.
Yeah. Well, I basically just came to Hong Kong and I just started the business. I mean, I didn't have much to lose, so. I mean, I could still go to university if I wanted to. I guess that's my point. So instead of going to university, I actually just started the business. Well.
Because most people take a kind of year off when they're young, but you decided you weren't going to do that. You'd go full on into a pretty heavyweight business here.
Yeah, well, I started kind of small scale, but I guess the reason why, right, like it's kind of risk and return. If you think about it, to produce something in Denmark, it costs you 4 or 5 times more just for the office, all the filings and the salaries and all these kind of things. So you kind of have 5 shots. You get 4 shots free, basically, right? You pay for it. I mean, that's kind of the risk and return model. Right? Like you look at it, you pay you put 50,000 down every month for salaries and all these kind of things to research your product, right? But in Denmark, it lasts for 1 month, for one guy, right? So in Hong Kong, you actually get 5 people working for you. And it's actually the same today because the euro is pretty high, and I mean, and the standard of living, actually it's all related to the structure of the economies and all these kind of things like tax and all these things, right? I mean, the living in Hong Kong is not much worse than in New York. I mean, small apartments, everything is pretty expensive. I mean, my staff, they tell me. Because we also have staff in U.S., right? So sometimes they joke to me, oh, they make because they're hiring people that get say $120,000 US a year, right? Whereas you're pretty well off in Hong Kong if you get half of that, $70,000 US, right, or $60,000 US. You're pretty well off, right? You're middle class.
Rather depends on the job you've got, actually.
I mean, everything is relative, right?
Yes, indeed.
But the reason why people are making more in Western Europe and in the U.S. is because everything is so much more expensive. You have the high euros, you have the VATs that you pay. I mean, everything but housing in Hong Kong is cheap.
Well, we have a very low tax rate, of course, which is one of the things that people do look at.
Yeah.
But Christian, can I follow you up with another question from our audience here, from Canada, in fact. And what would be your advice as to the 3 things that you would have if you were to start a new startup in Hong Kong? In other words, what are the 3 items that you would look at particularly if you were a startup in Hong Kong? What are the things that are particularly advantageous for you?
Well, the cost structure is very, very important. The office space in Hong Kong is not very expensive unless you're in Central or some of the high-end locations like Causeway Bay. Those are more expensive. So the cost structure for office and overheads are pretty low here. Another thing is the tax system. If you structure your business correctly, like I mean, if Hong Kong is your headquarters and you structure it correctly with whoever your tax advisor is and your own finance people, it becomes pretty tax advantage. I mean, there's a lot of tax advantages about being in Hong Kong, and then I mean all these things I think are. I think all these things are reflected in that Hong Kong always wins one of the top 1, 2, 3 in the whole world for the freest economy, all these kind of factors. So, and then I think the third thing I think is there's a ton of smart people here in Hong Kong. You have 8 million people that you can hire from. In New York, you have how many people live in New York? 25 million people, 20 million people. So it compares relatively well. You have 8 million very smart people here, and you can hire people from China, very smart people. You can get them on working visa, and even around the region. I mean, the immigration laws are pretty. They're relatively okay compared to other places around the region and elsewhere in Europe. So all these things are actually very good reasons for starting in Hong Kong.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Peter, for you, a question, and here it is. How does your Shanghai office reimburse your Hong Kong headquarters for its share of the administrative and marketing expenses that you have overall, I suppose, between those two places? That's a pretty straightforward question.
We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have since 1997 incorporated a company in Shanghai. It's called Mingyuan Chemicals Trading. This was a company that we had incorporated with a view of doing domestic import-exporting. I think this is an important element of our overall group business, because when you incorporate in Pudong, back about over 10 years ago, there was a window of opportunity there that you were able to incorporate and invest a company that the government grants you a license to allow you to import and export. And through that, we were able to import our products into China. We were then negotiating with a number of locations in China to warehouse these products, and then we were distributing them in the domestic market in renminbi. It took us about 6 or 7 years, however, to learn the ropes of how to do that cycle of remitting and getting your RMB out of China. It's a very, very complex process. And I'm not sure that window is still the same as it was back in 1997, but there was, at that time, Jiang Zemin was putting out this policy of having people to come in and invest in the Pudong area. So we invested, I think, about $250,000 into a company. It was a trading company to primarily do the import-export. So as far as expenses are concerned, majority of our expenses are being charged off to this import-export organization, whereas we sell in China, part of the profit then goes to this company. And this company, of course, you have to go through all this auditing and CPA in China, hiring a Chinese CPA, so you have to do all that work, and the Chinese-style bookkeeping. Chinese-style bookkeeping.
So there is very much an advantage for being in Hong Kong in that sense of the word.
What you need to do is you need to understand the accounting and the CPA, etc., in China are very different from how it's done in Hong Kong. So if you run a business, you need to look at the advantages that China would grant you to be able to have a company in China, and yet that holding company can be in Hong Kong, so that some of that expenses are charged off in China, and then the rest of them you can still have it charged off to your operation in Hong Kong, which is another benefit, is that in Hong Kong, the accounting system is generally recognized around the world, and it's also a very simple and easy accounting structure. So it is very clear to our auditors that we are doing business in China, so that they do accept a lot of the expenses and fee that we needed to incur in China to do business.
Peter, just to follow up, somebody's asking what are the reasons for moving your sales and marketing offices from Shanghai to Hong Kong? And I suppose in many ways you've said why, have you?
I would say there are 1,000 answers. Perhaps the first 10 of them, one of them would be the new China labor contract law, which I think you've read a lot in the news. And this has put a dent on company wanting to hire any PRC locals and take them on to staff. You're going to be ending up with quite an enormous amount of labor-related cases on your hands. Myself, as well as many of the business owners in China, have started to feel that the labor relations has gone down a wrong path during the last 2 or 3 years as the labor market becomes tighter and the enormous amount of money, just like what Thane said, is flowing into China and in particular flowing into Shanghai. You are also having a lot of labor relations issue as well. So instead of attention being focused on training the people, opening a business and selling your products for you, you end up with spending 50 or more of your management time dealing with labor issues. I remember when I talked with many of my friends running businesses in Shanghai that in October of 2007, they say that more than 50% of the time of top executives in businesses in Shanghai were deciding on what to do with the new labor contract law. So you can see the enormous cost it is. So this is just one of the 10 issues. There are many other issues as well, but I just wanted to. So, you know, I don't think we have enough time to cover all of them, but this is one of them that has been in use quite a bit.
Peter, thanks very much. And indeed, it's as you say, we are rapidly running out of time, but thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen here, and ladies and gentlemen for listening to us in the audience, for covering this outstanding business seminar, I guess it's turned into, and very much of an interesting talking point from every angle there. We've heard every sort of possibility of how you should and when you should be here in Hong Kong, and thanks very much.